Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, happy Thursday. Thank you for listening. We appreciate that, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. If people ask me all the time, why do you list out where all your shows is broadcast? Well, because sometimes people only catch it in the middle of hearing it on America One Radio and go, I would have loved to have heard this entire show. I'm letting you know how you can hear the entire show. Later in the show, my guest is Judd Legum from Popular Info. He is a great follow on the Twitter X platform, by the way. He wrote a story a couple of days ago that detailed a little known about, lightly reported on, if at all, FBI raid of a corporate headquarters here in Atlanta of an apartment community. And he dives into the insinuation, and there seems to be a lot of evidence on this. Politico's been reporting on this since March, that there's been a scheme among a lot of corporate landlords to artificially increase rent through collusion. Yeah. When our cost of someplace to live goes up, it affects inflation, which affects the economy, right? Anyway, we're going to talk with Judd about that. He also, by the way, did a succinct breakdown on the Twitter X platform and Popular Info as well. By the way, I'll put this in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Eviscerating all the right-wing nonsense, all the howling and whining about how unfair the Manhattan court was, and there's a mean to our guy, Donald Trump. He breaks it all down. This guy's really smart. I got to figure out like how we make him more famous than he already is. He's got like 500,000 followers or so. Is he handsome? Is he funny? We got to somehow make this guy more a social media sensation than he already is, because he's really good at what he does. Can't wait to talk to him. Speaking of court cases, yesterday we got this news, and I don't know about you guys, but like I literally kind of did the hand palm stamping the steering wheel. Damn it! Here is Hallie Jackson from NBC News discussing the headlines with Danny Cevallos, their legal analyst.
Getting some breaking news into us, some developing news late this afternoon in just the last couple of minutes here. So, Danny, I want to go to you on this here because it is coming from changing our brains, right? Not Hunter Biden, but let's talk about former President Donald Trump and the case that's being brought against him in Georgia, essentially, that is now on pause, essentially. We've just heard from the Georgia Court of Appeals. They have stayed the Trump case pending appeal. In other words, they have pressed pause on that case while Donald Trump essentially fights against Fani Willis, bringing that case against him. What happened? Why is it so significant here? I imagine it has to do with the timeline of whether or not this case would actually get to a jury prior to the election.
Yeah, you're looking right now at the entire order. I mean, that's the image. Yeah. It is a single page. It's not a long opinion where there's a bunch of case law cited. And the court is basically pausing the proceedings below during the appeal of the motion that was to disqualify Fani Willis. And you may recall that the trial court, the judge, issued an order and an opinion saying, well, you have a choice. You can either disqualify the entire DA's office, or you can disqualify this one guy, and the one guy being the attorney on the team that was alleged to have had a romantic affair with Fani Willis. Now, the defense appealed that, and this pause, will effectively ensure that this case will not go to trial before the election. And candidly, given the history of the speed at which cases move in this particular county, in this state court, it was already something of a long shot that it would make it to trial. But now this pretty much seals it. And just to take you back, remember, this was not Trump's team that initiated this motion. This was a single defendant, Michael Roman, and a defense attorney, Ashley Merchant, who reportedly had a ton of angst before filing it, knowing that it would stir up a hornet's nest. And a hornet's nest it did stir up. Sure enough, now that one attorney, Ashley Merchant, who came up with this motion, this idea, may be the single reason this case ultimately is delayed past the election for sure. Because at this point now, the delay, the pause placed on the trial court is really, it's a guarantee. This case is not going before the election. And really, once you get past the election, it's sort of questionable what the heck is going to even happen to this case in the future.
So literally, at first, I'm hearing this breaking on talk radio yesterday, and my hands hit the steering wheel. Damn it. Thanks, Fani. Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, I mean, that's my innate reaction. And at the same time, I've been conflicted, not going to lie. I've said this openly on the show. I do not like the manner with which Fani Willis and Nathan Wade have handled this from the moment Ashley Merchant and Michael Roman, her client, filed this motion, this conflict of interest. The idea of the conflict of interest is kind of goofy in and of itself because it's not as if Fani Willis was having an affair with one of the Trump defendant's attorneys. That would be a conflict of interest. Or Scott McAfee. Ooh, what a scandal that would be, right? There's no conflict of interest really in the two of them who are working together having a romantic liaison. What is the conflict of interest exactly for the defendants? No one can answer that. That's the flimsiness of this all. This is just more chicanery, more sabotage, if you will, throwing the sabot, the wooden shoe. That's how the word sabotage came to be. The wooden shoe into the gears of the machine to grind it to a halt. That's how sabotage, that's how the word came to be. I know that because the story was told in a Star Trek movie. It's an anecdote that somebody said in Star Trek. I think it was Kim Cattrall's character. I could really get into some Star Trek here, but I won't. Anyway, that's what this is all about. They're just looking for that little nuance that they can use to their advantage. Well, let's go with conflict of interest, but there is no conflict against us. Well, no, but we can also kind of drag a district attorney through the mud and point out she's having an affair with a married man and really make some hay with this. Ta-da, here we are. And arguably the most bona fide, the most verifiable, the most evidence-heavy case against Donald Trump on all the court cases that he has is now essentially delayed until after Election Day. I mean, this is literally like, imagine the weary wife who has a job and she just got home from work and her husband's at the bar again and got, thrown in jail because of a bar brawl, and she's got to throw on her shoes and put the earrings back on, grab the purse and go pick up her husband. That's what the voter is. We're the weary voter who has to go and do this ourselves. I mean, we do. And honestly, ever since the Trump 34 conviction date last week, that's what the right-wing voters have been telling us too. And their pundits, this is going to have to be decided on Election Day. Yep, it absolutely is. And the American voter needs to just wake up to that resolution. We were waiting for 4 years because we were told by the Law and Order Party that let the process play out. Don't do the crime, and you won't have to face the penalties and all that rigmarole that normally works against people who aren't well connected or wealthy or white, male, and heterosexual and in the Republican Party. And I would be the one to sit here and tell you why it's so important to make sure that a court case like the Georgia election interference case gets into a courtroom and is adjudicated for the American public. But I'm going to let Jon Stewart from The Daily Show Monday night tell you why it's more important, and mostly because journalists aren't really doing their job anymore. And Republicans and pundits outside courtrooms know that and get away with telling absolute bullshit lies. But in court, they can't do that because there's a little thing called perjury.
This is why the law and order right hates court procedures when applied to them. Courts are the last remaining guardrail that has a standard of evidentiary presentation. It is the last place where you have to prove what you say, and you see the difference in what they say out of court versus what they say in court. Here is Trump on the 2020 election out of court.
This is a fraud.
We know there was massive fraud. It was a rigged election, 100%.
Here are his lawyers in court.
This is not a fraud case. We are not alleging fraud in this lawsuit.
Here is Rudy Giuliani pleading before the Court of Seasonal Landscapers. He's pleading, but not in the actual court.
It's a fraud, an absolute fraud.
And what does Giuliani say about that in court?
Yes, but this is not a fraud case. It's 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 not a fraud case
in court, where I would need evidence. It's only a fraud case out there amongst the sod and the mulch, where I can say whatever I want. Fox News says that Dominion voting machines rigged the election for Biden out of court.
They were flipping votes in the computer system or adding votes that did not exist. The whole situation was carefully calculated and created to steal the election from President Trump.
Anyway, that is the plea deal taking Sidney Powell, by the way, on Fox News.
But that's what you can say out of court. But in court, Fox was forced to pay $787 million for false statements. The difference between in court and out of court is that in court, someone can say, prove it.
Yep.
And the problem is that most of the time in this country, our political leaders are not in court. They are here on TV, where the news media has decided that there's really no such thing as reality.
We now live in two utterly different universes.
These two Americas are living in two different realities.
Well, we're living in two different realities.
No. You're thinking of the multiverse.
Right.
We are all living in one reality. And it can be the news media's job to litigate the parameters of said reality.
Great example, by the way. I was listening to NPR yesterday, and the Montana Senate race is now set. Tim Sheehy, who moved from Minnesota in 2014, businessman. He is a corporate farmer type now. He's taking on John Tester, a longtime Democrat, former governor of the state, very popular in the state, the last remaining statewide Democrat representing the state of Montana in any shape, form, or fashion. He is a multi-generational Montanan and farmer, and he's facing a battle against this Tim Sheehy guy who served in the military and runs a lot on that, leans on that a lot about how he and his wife both served in the military to defend this country. And yet there's this whole incident about how Tim Sheehy got shot in the arm when in 2015 he apparently got shot in a national park because he was carrying a weapon, and national parks, they kind of have a rule about that. Anyway, listen to how NPR spelled out this story and listen to Tim Sheehy's rationale for not coughing up medical records to prove that he claims he was shot in Afghanistan, and that's where the bullet wound came from.
And recent questions have come up over an incident at Glacier National Park a few years back. The Washington Post first reported that Sheehy was cited in 2015 for accidentally discharging a firearm that lodged a bullet in his forearm at the park in northwest Montana. Sheehy had previously said the bullet in his arm is from his days in active combat. His timeline of events is inconsistent with the park ranger's 2015 account. That was detailed in a summary the National Park Service released recently. He's also resisted releasing his medical records that may show when he sustained the bullet wound. In an interview with Montana Public Radio, he says he shouldn't have to release medical records if Tester doesn't, pointing to Tester's story of losing 3 fingers in a childhood meat grinding accident.
John Tester was 9 years old when that happened. Do you have medical records from when you were 9 years old? And also, what does that have to do with you lying potentially about being shot while in military service of this country, which you, by the way, base your campaign on so much? What does that have to do with John Tester losing his fingers at the age of 9? Do you think he's making that up? Yeah, so what Jon Stewart's saying is right. The media is not really pushing back on this. Sir, what does that have to do with you insinuating you got shot in Afghanistan when park rangers say you shot yourself in a national park instead? He says one thing to media, but if he were put in a courtroom and made to validate that, he'd probably have a different story and have to provide evidence, like medical records. But the media could be doing this as well, and we've just lost that spine, that will, that fortitude in most of our mainstream sources of journalism. To show you how right-wingers act when they get to subvert our judicial process, I got to play a little bit of audio from local talk radio hack Shelley Winters. Just comedic. Stand by for that when the Ron Show returns here on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. Incidentally, Judd Legum from Popular Info joins the show for the second half. We're going to talk about the FBI raid on the Atlanta office of a corporate landlord and how that all ties to some political reporting done in March that alleges a scheme amongst a lot of the corporate landlords to artificially increase rents through collusion. But first, I want you to listen to local talk radio host Shelley Winters as he opens yesterday's show in sheer glee that, once again, his boy Donald Trump and that cabal of cultists and acolytes working for the various other defendants got away with it this time, and potentially for good, on the most important case, I believe, facing Donald Trump this calendar year. It's not about the legalities of it. It's not about guilt or innocence. It's about dodging it.
Let's get right to it. So I was waiting for my good friend. Hopefully he calls in. So here's the breaking news of the day. The biggest news of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Let me. All I do is win, win, win. All he does is win. All this guy does is win.
Really? He just got convicted, 34 convictions against a jury of his peers. And I know. Well, that was Manhattan. He couldn't get a fair trial in New York City because it's such a liberal city. Those jurors gave their news sources up, and Trump's attorneys had a hand in picking the jurors. The news sources cited by those jurors: Truth Social, New York Post, Fox News, Wall Street Journal, and the Twitter X platform. I mean, if we're going to howl about indoctrination, the indoctrination sounds like it's coming from the right. However, a jury of Donald Trump's peers in the Manhattan circuit found him guilty. Judd Legum, by the way, who joins the show in just a few minutes, did a fantastic summation of the validity of that trial on the Twitter X platform. I will share that thread. In fact, he put it in an article in popular.info. So I'm going to give you that in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Anyway, let me give you a little bit more of the audio of this circus from last night.
Here's the headline. Georgia appeals court temporarily halts Trump's 2020 election case in Fulton County. It didn't temporarily. It's halted. It stopped. Then the AJC, my good friends at the AJC, which Bill Rankin and Tamar Halleman, they have to paint a picture. Meet the Georgia judges who will hear appeal of challenge to DA Fani Willis. And they show you the pictures of the three judges. And then second paragraph. Oral arguments were initially set for October 4th, but Christina Cooley-Smith, I'm reading from the AJC article, Deputy Court Administrator for the Court of Appeals, said Tuesday that the date will be rescheduled if oral arguments are requested and the judges choose to grant them. Due to a timing conflict, the judges are constitutionally required to issue a ruling by March 2025. But then they find an Atlanta attorney, Andrew Fleischman. They had to find somebody, right? Because you can't write articles in Georgia without pointing out they're conservatives. You have to. Because you have to spin this narrative that these guys, they're unfair. They're conservatives.
Scott McAfee is a Republican, too, I believe. Shelley just somehow doesn't manage to point that out in this hardy har clown show that he calls Substantive News on the leading news talk radio station in the 10th largest metropolitan area in the United States. That's what passes for substantive news talk in these United States, in Atlanta, Georgia. It's over. It's over. I mean, this is where the decay of political discourse and the rot that now festoons itself not just at the county or the city or the state level, where, by the way, we have still yet to have heard from the governor of the state of Georgia about Atlanta's water crisis. That is just one of those things. That sounds like a city problem. They should have fixed that a long time ago. Yeah, you're right. The city of Atlanta should have fixed an 1883 water pipe, maybe back when, I don't know, white men conservatives ran the city in the 1930s, 20s, 50s, 40s, somewhere in that realm. Instead of just taking off and, it's your problem now, guys. See ya. As a white fled to the suburbs. The Republican Party of my lifetime used to tout its moral compass, its moral superiority, and they can't anymore. They just can't. They're defending a convicted felon, someone who has been found guilty of sexual assault, who on a hot mic said that that's exactly what he does because they let him. So I remind us all, as voters, we're going to have to do this ourselves. Back after this, The Ron Show on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
It's so crazy that I reached out to Judd Legum yesterday morning to book him to talk about this FBI corporate raid on a Metro Atlanta corporate landlord office. That happened a week ago. WSB had the story last night, by the way.
We've talked a lot about unaffordable housing here on WSB Tonight in the past, but new tonight, we're learning the feds are now actually investigating illegal price fixing, keeping rent prices up.
In fact, it actually led to the FBI coming in and searching a local apartment management company. Channel 2's Candace McCowan is live in Buckhead. And Candace, you got a response from that company.
Yeah, that's right, Wendy and George. The FBI did confirm that their agents were at the address where Cortland Management's offices are here in Atlanta. That's a company that manages apartments across the country, and they have almost 24 apartment complexes just like that right here in Metro Atlanta. Cortland, a multifamily housing management company, has confirmed federal agents were at their Buckhead office. In a statement to Channel 2 saying, we can confirm that the Federal Bureau of Investigation executed a limited search warrant at our Atlanta office as a part of an ongoing investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice into potential antitrust violations in the multifamily housing industry. Search happened last week. Right now, there are no charges and a complaint hasn't been filed. Former prosecutor Chris Timmons explained what antitrust violations could mean.
Is some sort of anti-competitive behavior, meaning that there's an allegation of probably price fixing in some way. Someone that they've had contact with is accused of setting prices and driving the prices in the multifamily housing market artificially high.
Cortland is a company with properties throughout the country, but also all over the metro, from Cobb County to Fulton and Gwinnett. Cortland went on to say, we are cooperating fully with that investigation, and we understand that neither Cortland nor any of our employees are targets of that investigation.
Typically, a search warrant comes into play when somebody's not responding to a subpoena or some sort of other informal document request. When that happens, law enforcement takes out a search warrant, gets it from a judge. Judge finds there's probable cause that there's evidence at that location of a crime, and then they go and serve the search warrant.
As the investigation continues, renters are hopeful this could eventually lead to relief in rental prices.
We're cutting on maybe food, looking for affordable choices.
And we did reach out to the Department of Justice today, but we did not hear back. As for Cortland, they said due to the ongoing litigation that they could not comment further at this time.
Joining me to discuss this, someone who has been reporting on this a lot more than most mainstream media outlets, is Judd Legum with Popular Info. That is popular.info. Judd, thanks for joining me. I appreciate that. Your story caught my attention days ago. WSB TV here in Atlanta reporting on it finally last night. This raid happened at Cortland's corporate headquarters here in Buckhead, Atlanta last week. And it may not necessarily mean that Cortland is being targeted, but you explain in further detail in the article, which, by the way, we'll put in the show notes at ronshowatl.com, who they are targeting. And it's like a software element, a software company that a lot of the corporate landlords use to gauge where their rents need to be. Am I reading that right?
That's pretty much it. Cortland uses a piece of software called RealPage that's used by a lot of large corporate landlords. And that's really the issue, because what happens is that they buy this software. Cortland, other corporate landlords load in all of the information about prices, occupancy rates, all the details, and then essentially offload the pricing decisions to this piece of software. And what's been alleged in class action lawsuits, in some lawsuits filed by state attorney generals in Arizona and DC, and now what's the focus of this federal investigation is that essentially this piece of software is used by corporate landlords to artificially increase prices. Because if you know that all your competitors are also using this software, you can very confidently price your units higher because you know you will not be undercut because everyone is using the same piece of software.
Are these corporate landlords, are they doing this willfully, or are they just kind of being blindly led by real pages?
Well, I think that's something that the investigation is going to try to uncover. But based on my reporting, the landlords who are using this software know exactly what they're doing. Because if you look at the promotional materials that RealPage sends out, they talk about the ability to, once you implement this software, to charge 5%, 8% higher than otherwise the market would bear. So that's part of their pitch of why you should do this, is to increase your prices. And also there is, at least as alleged in some of these lawsuits that have already been filed, RealPage doesn't just put in the software, they also have this very aggressive operation that enforces the prices on their customers, on these corporate landlords, and make sure that they're not cheating the system in pricing them below what the software recommends.
Wow. Now, let's bring this home to Atlanta, where I live, and the impact that it has on just one metro area. And I think you do a really good job in the article. By the way, we'll have it in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. How this really affects Atlanta's cost of living and rent. And this obviously is so important to dealing with inflation. Obviously, your single biggest expense usually is where you're living. But Atlanta is really feeling the heat of this sort of alleged collusion.
Yeah. Well, one is that one of the reasons why the FBI might be targeting Atlanta and the Atlanta area first is there is an incredible concentration of units that are either owned by Corcoran or other corporate landlords who are using this software. It's according to one lawsuit, it's 53% of the multifamily rental market. So, rentals in these larger buildings. And overall, rents in Atlanta, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, are up 56% since 2016. So you've had a huge adoption of this software, and it's coincided with a large increase in rents. And yeah, there's been inflation across the board, but a big driver of it is the inflation in rental prices, which has outpaced almost every other sector.
Here's where I get angry, by the way. And I mentioned this to you when we emailed back and forth. I'm a residential real estate agent, a realtor. I know the ripple effects. I can see the ripple effects in my line of work away from podcasting, in that, like, I'm currently renting. I'm two plus years out of divorce, and so that and starting in real estate, you've got 1099s instead of W-2, so it takes a few years to show the mortgage lenders you've got the income structure to purchase again. So I'm waiting on that. So I'm literally leasing a condo in the building that I used to own a condo in from a private individual, but the private individual even gets affected by activity like this, because and I like my landlord, don't get me wrong, I'm not mad at her. She too has had the rent increase on us in the last couple of years because, well, everybody else is doing it. That's what the market bears.
Yeah, essentially one of the things that the software allows the large buildings to do, and this of course will filter down to even the small individual landlords, is one of the ways you can get a good deal is if there's a lot of vacancies at once, and this will happen cyclically in a large building. A bunch of people will move out all at the same time, and then they've got to fill up those units because they don't want them to sit empty, and they'll lower their rates in order to do so. But what the software does is make sure that within a market, there is never, they'll just allow the units to sit empty for a while. And they'll make sure that there's never a glut of units. So you never have any of this downward pressure. And so I think that not only gives the people using the software the confidence, but even somebody who's just on their own, maybe owns a unit or 2 units, they know, hey, I can price this higher and people are not going to have a choice because there's not going to be cheap units available that are going to undercut me.
Well, and in Atlanta, we just don't have that problem anyway. People will rent whatever they can get because, we colloquially say here in Atlanta, we full, but we're not. We have people who are still moving here. This metro area is one of the fastest growing in the country, and they still anticipate another million and a half people moving here by 2040, and we don't have the places for them to stay right now. So obviously we're not doing a well enough job building starter homes or new homes or affordable homes or mass transit or any of that stuff that enables people to live a little further out. So yeah, the corporate landlords, even the mom and pop landlords, they're in the catbird seat. They can charge whatever they want. And my question to you is there any way to undo any of this? Will there be class action lawsuits? Because this affects people who, may have been renting for 3 or 4 years, who now look back and go, wait, you mean I've been getting overcharged by $200-$300 a month or whatever, number they can affix to that. And that adds up. That adds up to a down payment on a house that they could be buying instead.
Yeah, well, I think there have been lawsuits that have already been filed, class action lawsuits that have already been filed. There's been these state attorney general lawsuits that have been filed. And then, potentially there's going to be a federal action. We know that there's an investigation now. That's why these offices in your area were raided. If these actions are successful and RealPage either isn't in business or has to change the way they practice, and you do have a real competitive market where the big buildings have to compete with one another on price instead of colluding with one another on price, it's not going to solve all of the problems. As you mentioned, there's a shortage. There's not enough building going on. There's all sorts of issues, but it is a significant contributing factor, and that would put some downward pressure on the prices, maybe at least slow down the increases somewhat that we've been seeing, in the Atlanta metro area, but also in many metro areas all around the country.
We're with Judd Legum from Popular Info, who has been covering the story of what appears to be some collusion between corporate landlords using a software company called RealPage to gauge and use an algorithm to keep pace of what their rents should be. RealPage, for its part, in your article, it's just a misunderstanding. Can you explain that reaction from them?
Well, they're just saying that this is revenue management software. They're just helping people manage their stock, and that it's not their rental stock, and that it's not anti-competitive. And I guess we'll just have to see how this litigation pans out. Certainly, their marketing materials paint a different picture, but of course, they have the right to go into court and defend themselves, and it looks like they'll likely get the opportunity to do so.
So, is this any different than when people who are buying or selling homes look at apps like Zillow and the Zestimate and listen, as a real estate agent, I tell my buyers and sellers all the time, ignore that. It doesn't mean squat. There's some sort of algorithm that they're putting behind that. But even Zillow's own CEO found out that the house that he needed to sell didn't meet the Zestimate. Is there any similarity to that sort of algorithmic use there?
There's some similarities, but it's a lot different as well because there's limited information. It's not just the listed price, which is what you're going to see at Zillow. It's what actual price the tenants are paying, all of the units that aren't on the market, what those people are paying, the vacancy rates, the units that are empty but not being listed, all of that kind of, the fees, all of that kind of information is fed into the RealPage system. And then also what's happening is the pricing information is being spit back out. So not only do they know do they know the information, they're also getting this recommendation that through a very sophisticated algorithm is incorporating that and finding the maximum price that can be offered.
And also, I would point out that in real estate, the market will tell you, the market will dictate what a home is eventually worth. Whereas, in a private home sale, you're eventually going to find out when you do or don't get offers what the house is worth. With apartments, these corporate landlords, they can sit there confidently because of the use of RealPage and hold their ground. They're not going to have to negotiate on rent prices when, some Jim or Tammy come into the leasing office and, Olivia's there to help them out. No, that's what it says here on the card. That's what it rents for. And they're pretty confident that they know that that's what it'll go for.
Yeah, and they're confident because they're getting that recommendation, but also, and this is the key factor, they know that most of their competitors are also using the same system. So they know that the building 2 blocks away is not going to, if somebody comes into there, it might be before you have a bunch of vacancies in your building or more than you'd like. You come in, you go into the leasing office, and the renter, prospective renter, could negotiate down. Maybe they knock on $100 off. Maybe they knock $200 off. Because you want to fill that unit. Now the buildings are standing firm because they know that person is not going to be able to get in their car and drive 3 blocks away and find a better deal because everyone's using the same system and everyone is not negotiating.
Judd Leggett with Popular Info. We'll put that article in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. I was talking first half of the show with the story of the Fani Willis case now, the Georgia election interference case has been put on pause. And, man, you just had an excellent summation rebutting all of the nonsense from the right about the fallacy, the flimsiness of the Manhattan DA case. I wanted to share that as well, so we'll put that in the show notes as well at ronshowatl.com. Judd, last question. Why is the national media not giving this sort of story more airtime? I've said for weeks now, housing is, to me, the biggest issue not being covered in an election year that needs to be covered.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because the issue of inflation itself obviously gets a lot of coverage in the political context. But I think housing is sort of seen as not a sexy topic. I can say that the reaction to this piece that I put out has been explosive. There are so many people reaching out to me, so many people interested in finding out more that I really think that, hey, more people need to jump on this story because there's a ton of interest. And so I know I'm going to follow it as well.
And I maintain, again, on a liberal conversational show here, I maintain that this is something that politicians need to be getting onto. There needs to be that moonshot proclamation by 2040. Somebody's got to do it, and I think that'll nudge them ahead in the campaign anyway. Judd Leggett, Popular Info at popular.info, by the way, online, and they can follow you on the Twitter X platform. In fact, I recommend it. Thank you so much for your time and joining me on the Ron Show today.
Thanks for having me.
In the final stretches of the Thursday Ron Show, follow us on your preferred social media platforms at Ron Show ATL. New Quinnipiac polling out for Georgia voters. And let's just read right from them. Less than a week after former President Donald Trump became the first U.S. president to be convicted of a felony, he holds a slight lead over President Joe Biden in Georgia, 49 to 44% in a head-to-head matchup. You throw some other folks in the race, and Donald Trump still leads. I said to you that the Chase Oliver thing was going to make this difficult. Trump leads with 43% support. Biden, 37%. Independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., 8%. Libertarian Party candidate Chase Oliver, 3%. I think that would grow. Independent candidate Cornel West, 3%. I think that would eventually flip to Joe Biden. Push comes to shove. Jill Stein, 2%. So you could conceivably see where you could go, 5% will probably wind up on Joe Biden's plate there. That would be 43-42 with RFK Jr. inexplicably getting 8%, Chase Oliver with 3%. We'll see about that. Now, what about the conviction? What do Georgia's voters think about a conviction of Donald Trump? Do they believe in it? Half of Georgia's voters agree with the verdict. 44% disagree. Obviously, when you break it down by party, 96% of Democrats agreeing with the verdict. 10% Republicans agreeing with the verdict. Independents? To me, that's the most important one, right? Like, we know what Democrats are going to think. We know what Republicans are going to think. Independents, 52% agree with the verdict, 42% disagree. Drilling down a little further in the Quinnipiac results, voters were asked about the charges former President Trump and others are facing in Georgia, where they are accused of trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Roughly 4 in 10 voters, 41%, believe Trump did something illegal, while 19% believe he did something unethical but nothing illegal. 35% believe he did not do anything wrong. Oh, God, y'all. Amongst independents, 43% believe Trump did something illegal. 25% believe he did something unethical, but nothing illegal. 29% believe he did nothing wrong. Are those polled confident that the Georgia Secretary of State's office and their election division will handle 2024's election count right? 68% of Georgia voters say they're either very confident, that's 35%, or somewhat confident, 33%, that the vote count will be correct. 30% say they are either not so confident or not at all confident, by a 17 and 13% margin there. There's a big partisan divide. While 55% of Democrats and 40% of independents say they're very confident that votes across Georgia will be counted accurately by the Georgia Secretary of State, who's a Republican. Only 15% of Republicans say they are very confident. Down to the presidential debate, they ask about that. As the current and former presidents prepare to take the states together in Atlanta later this month for the first presidential debate in the election cycle, 75% of voters think it is likely they will watch the debate, 22% saying, oh, God, anything but. Quinnipiac goes issue by issue. Voters were asked who they think would do a better job handling 6 issues. On abortion, 47% Biden, 45% Trump. Preserving democracy in the United States, my God, 49% say Trump, 46% say Biden. We need a litmus test for voting. I'm sorry. I know that's unconstitutional, but the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 54% believe Trump would handle that better, while 47% say Biden. Did we not? The beautiful call? Georgia voters, come on, y'all. The response to Israel, Hamas, 53% say Trump, 39% say Biden. Immigration, 56% say Trump, 39% say Biden. The economy, despite the overwhelming evidence that the economy has fared better under Obama, Biden, and Biden-Harris, 58% say Trump, 39% say Biden. You think there's not a messaging problem within the Democratic Party? The most important issue, according to voters, given a list of 11 issues and asked which is the most important one in deciding who to vote for in the 2024 election, 29% of Georgia's voters who were polled say the economy, followed by preserving democracy and immigration. And oh, by the way, President Biden is trailing Georgia's 2 Democratic senators on job approval. 36% approve for Joe Biden, 60% disapprove for Raphael Warnock, 48% approve, 38% disapprove for John Ossoff, 47% approve, 32% disapprove. Let me get back to the economy real quick. I want to read these 3 lines. 29% of voters describe the state of the nation's economy these days as either excellent or good. That's 4 and 25%, by the way. While 70% of voters describe it as either not so good or poor. 61% of voters describe their financial situation these days as either excellent or good. 61%. While 38% describe it as either not so good or poor. Quinnipiac writes, this continues a pattern in battleground states polled by Quinnipiac University, where voters view their personal financial situation substantially more positively than the state of the nation's economy. It's messaging. It's messaging, y'all. That's all it is. It's messaging. But Biden-Harris has to be careful to talk about kitchen table issues, cost of groceries, skyrocketing rents. We just talked about that with Judd Legum, and who's at fault for that as well, by the way. It ain't Biden-Harris, that's for sure. We just found that out. Last line real quick, incidentally, 33% of voters say food prices, the economic issue that worries them the most right now. 25% say the cost of housing and rent. 17% say the price of consumer goods, and 12% say gas and energy prices. We'll put the poll findings in the show notes along with Judd Legum's 2 pieces that we talked about today at ronshowatl.com. I want to thank Judd Legum for joining us, and you as well. Replay 5 to 6 p.m. on the America One Radio app, on demand all day at progressivevoices.com. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on America One Radio. Take care.